So we will now resume our public hearing on resolution number 210657. And before we hear testimony from the witnesses, I know my colleague, Councilmember Isaiah Thomas, is with us, and he is the sponsor. Councilmember Thomas, would you like to make any opening comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to all the members of the committee. I'll be brief in my opening comments. I just want to say thank you for being here this afternoon to convene this conversation. This is a very important issue as we look at the future of elections. We have a lot of things that have changed forever because of this unfortunate coronavirus crisis. And one of the things that has changed forever is how we vote. So we want to really take the time to examine what election day, the election process, as well as language access looks like for the constituents of Philadelphia. So thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the leeway, and I'm excited for this conversation. And thank you to the members of the committee for allowing me to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you so very much for your leadership on this issue, Councilmember Thomas. Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify this afternoon on resolution number 210657?
Yes. The first panel is Commissioner Omar Sabir, Al Schmidt, House Democratic Leader Joanna McClinton, and Marian Schneider. And I believe Commissioner Sabir is running a little behind, so we're going to move him to the end of the panel, which means we can begin with Al Schmidt, if that works.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Al Schmidt. Are you connected and ready to proceed?
I am, Chairperson Parker.
Thank you. Just state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chairperson Parker, Vice Chairperson Green, and members of the Law and Government Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today and offer testimony on priorities for a safe and secure 2022 election in Philadelphia. My name is Al Schmidt, and I'm President and CEO of the Committee of 70. Up until recently, I served as City Commissioner of Philadelphia for 10 years, but I'd ask that you note that I'm not speaking in that former capacity today. I've submitted my written testimony for your consideration, so I'll only briefly touch on a few of my remarks. While much of the needed reform to improve elections in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia has to occur and be enacted at the state level, there are much needed improvements at the city level as well that the administration and city council can make happen. Not only when it comes to operational assistance, such as more resources for staff and reallocating some city staff during peak election times, but also when it comes to language access and better compensation for our hardworking and undercompensated election board workers. And I've testified in front of City Council many times about that need, and I know you all share it as well. Importantly, when it comes to safe and secure elections, we need to avoid making false choices between improving ballot access and improving election integrity. There are some that would like us to believe that it's a zero-sum situation between improving ballot access and improving election integrity. There's no greater example than that than the use of mail-in ballot drop boxes. In the 2020 election, both the primary election and the general election, nearly half of our voters, or about half of our voters, voted by mail. That's 375,000 mail-in ballots to process in the general election of 2020. Because of the great use of mail-in ballot voting, both in Pennsylvania and other places where it's become available, and also because of the extremely tight, and I would argue unreasonable or unrealistic deadlines between the deadline to apply for a mail-in ballot and the deadline for the Board of Elections to receive that mail-in ballot back, which is only 7 days. And if a voter is following the rules, and a voter is submitting an application by the deadline, even if the city commissioners are able to turn that ballot around, which they have, in 24 hours, and get it out the door, that application processed, a ballot generated for that voter, and out the door, it still might take 2 to 3 days for delivery. The ballot has to be voted by the voter and then returned. And if returned by mail, it would likely arrive back, as we saw, after the mail-in ballot deadline of 8 p.m. on Election Day. It is tragic to see ballots arrive that were cast by eligible voters, registered voters, on or before Election Day, and to receive them back after those ballots can no longer be counted. Every ballot is precious to us. Those unrealistic deadlines, as well-intentioned as they might be, result in ballots being rejected because they arrive back too late. There is a solution to that problem, and that solution is making more drop-off locations available. Satellite offices, while very helpful and very useful in many different ways, are also are difficult to set up, expensive to operate, and when resources are available, should be used and expanded. Drop boxes are much more accessible. So when a voter applies for a mail-in ballot, again, we're talking about half of our voters, and gets that ballot or holds on to that ballot for too long, they still need to be able to get that ballot back to the Board of Elections. The false choice here is suggestions that mail-in ballot drop boxes are somehow less reliable or somehow less secure. If anything, it's the opposite. The voter is returning their ballot directly into the Board of Elections, not putting it in a mailbox, not going through the hands of Postal Service workers and machines, through transit stations and all the rest. It's coming directly back to the Board of Elections. Drop boxes are not cheap. They have to be secured into their location. They have to have 24-hour video surveillance. But the more resources available to have more drop boxes available to our voters, especially in high turnout elections like 2022, likely 2023, and certainly 2024, will benefit all of our voters. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today, and I would welcome any questions that you might have.
Thank you so very much, Al Schmidt, for your testimony. I'm sure there'll be some comments and questions. I now want to recognize our next witness. We are honored to have with us today Democratic leader of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and my former colleague, Joanna McClinton. Good afternoon, Leader McClinton. Are you connected and ready to proceed? I know she was on and may have had some technical difficulties. Can you hear me, Leader Joanna McClinton?
I can hear you. Can you now hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you now. Leader McClinton, it's an honor to have you with us today. Thank you so very much. Just feel free to state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Leader. My name for the record, Joanna McClinton, State Representative, 191st Legislative District, Minority Leader of the Pennsylvania House Democratic Caucus. Good afternoon, Councilwoman Parker, Councilman Thomas, and all of the distinguished members of the Committee of Law and Government. Thank you for allowing me to join you today to discuss an issue that I am very passionate about: promoting safe and secure elections and dismantling the barriers to voting. I know that everyone here is as concerned as I am regarding the repeated assaults on our democracy across the country. And right here in our Commonwealth, some of these attacks have been bold, brazen, and even deadly, like the attack on our nation's capital on January the 6th, 2021, while others have been more subtle but equally dangerous to the long-term health of our Commonwealth and the democratic institution. Whether it's contesting the results of the last presidential election in 2020 and insisting on taxpayer-funded Arizona-style audits, challenging the legality of no-excuse mail-in ballots, mail-in voting, or proposing election reforms that create barriers to voting, specifically in urban areas like the only city of the first class, Philadelphia, or advancing plans to permanently gerrymander Pennsylvania's congressional districts, or weakening our state system of check and balances. All of these measures sow doubt in the integrity of our election and our election officials, and they threaten our Commonwealth's most sacred institutions. These threats on our democracy are simply too important to ignore. My colleagues in Harrisburg and I have concentrated our efforts on countering these bad policy ideas with real common sense solutions to restore confidence and make voting safe and secure for everyone. Instead of undermining our democracy, the House Democratic Caucus wants to strengthen it. Our bill, the K. Leroy Irvis Voters Protection Act, or House Bill 2090, is named in honor of the first and only African-American Speaker of the Pennsylvania House, and it would ease the burdens on voting while bolstering our election security. First, it would allow every Pennsylvanian to vote, making sure that it is convenient, whether you are a teacher or an emergency responder, or you live in an assisted care facility. To accomplish this goal, the Irvis bill would permit early voting, provide for more ballot drop boxes, and allow for the same-day registration. These measures should not be controversial, as they have already been adopted in so many other states. Next, we need to finally listen to the election officials across the state who are on the front lines of our election and voting systems and answer their calls for assistance. The Irvis bill would make updates that our county election officials have requested, including the 21 days of pre-canvassing, where they can prepare and sort mail-in absentee ballots prior to Election Day. Finally, everyone wants safe and secure elections. Without that, the public will lack confidence in election outcomes. The Irvis bill would support election security by implementing statewide electronic poll books for secure, real-time monitoring of election rolls, a practice that is currently used by almost 36 states. I believe that the K. Leroy Irvis Voting Rights Protection Act will go a long way in stemming the repeated attacks on our voting rights and restoring the public's faith in our election system. One thing is certain: the right to vote is a sacred right, and it is at the core of our national identity. It's being challenged, and it will require all of us to work together to ensure that the threats that have been on our free and fair elections are only threats, that they are never successful. Whether it's combating the policy ideas that threaten the fairness of our election, advocating for measures like the K. Leroy Irvis Voting Rights Protection Act, or urging our friends and neighbors to register to vote and to participate every 6 months in each election. The stakes are high, and our communities cannot afford inaction. Thank you so very much for this time to share my thoughts as you all consider changing, upgrading, and strengthening our democracy here in my city, our city, Philadelphia.
Thank you so very much for your testimony, Leader McClinton. We're going to go to the next person to testify, but if you could stick around, I'm sure someone has a comment and or a question for you. The next person scheduled to testify, I hope I have this correct. Is it Marian Schneider? Marian, are you connected with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me and see me?
Oh, I can. Let me see. Okay, now I can see you. Thank you. So just please state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Marian Schneider, and I am the Senior Voting Rights Policy Counsel for the ACLU of Pennsylvania. I appreciate the opportunity to testify here today. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Chair Parker, Vice Chair Green, members of the committee, and especially Councilmember Isaiah Thomas for your leadership in making election issues a priority for City Council. I'm here today to talk about language access. The ACLU of Pennsylvania fully supports and endorses the efforts of the coalition Citizens for Language Access, who have taken the leadership role in advocating for expanded resources in voting for those who are not proficient in English. The ACLU of Pennsylvania joins the coalition in urging City Council to take the necessary steps, including allocating adequate funding towards, first, ensuring that the City of Philadelphia is in full compliance with its obligations under the Voting Rights Act. Second, adopting best practices generally accepted in other jurisdictions for implementing language access. And third, taking voluntary measures to expand language access to the tens of thousands of Philadelphia voting-age citizens who are not proficient in English and speak another language that is not within the current coverage formula of Section 203. I refer the members of the committee to the ACLU's written testimony submitted yesterday, but I'd like to emphasize a few of the points mentioned in there. The first is funding. Administering elections has grown increasingly more complex in recent years. I understand the complexity from firsthand experience as Deputy Secretary for Elections and Administration in the Pennsylvania Department of State from 2015 to 2017. In the current atmosphere, plagued by widespread attacks on our democratic institutions, it's more important than ever that election offices, including the Philadelphia City Commissioners, have the funding resources to make elections run as smoothly as possible. ACLU of Pennsylvania joins the coalition in urging City Council to make sure there's adequate funding to comply fully with the Federal Voting Rights Act and commit to expanding language accessibility to other non-English speaking voters. So some of the priority items that could be supported with additional funding include additional bilingual staff at the City Commissioner's office to support and increase their efforts to engage the communities in need of language assistance. Second is enhanced poll worker training. Third is the recruitment and appointment of bilingual poll workers, in addition to the local interpreters that they already have. And finally, competent, understandable translation of materials and websites is critically important. It's not acceptable to just rely on Google Translate for those efforts. Third, we urge Philadelphia to take the necessary steps to serve the tens of thousands of Philadelphia citizens in need of language assistance to fully engage in and exercise their right to vote. These citizens are not covered currently under the Voting Rights Act and yet still deserve an accessible voting experience. Such measures include having election materials available in the most prevalent spoken language in Philadelphia, in addition to Chinese and Spanish. Materials include the ballot, absentee and mail-in ballots, instructions, signage, and other vital voter information. In addition, I've already talked about poll worker training, but enhanced poll worker training in areas that have substantial populations of voters needing language assistance could go a long way towards ensuring participation by these voters. Such training could involve respectful and welcoming attitudes and greetings, cultural awareness and sensitivity, and the knowledge that voters who are legally guaranteed an assister of their choice in the polling place. As you will hear in the next panel, there are real people who are experiencing language barriers at the polls. We urge City Council to take steps to ensure that all voters have an easy and accessible voting experience. I'll end there, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and I invite any council members to reach out whenever if they have questions that I may assist with. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian Schneider, for your testimony. I now want to ask my colleagues, are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? Just put it in the chat. if you will, so that, and I see one hand. Before we proceed, I want to ask our minority leader, McClinton. Leader McClinton, wow, you listed a number of very significant items under the K. Leroy Irvis Voter Protection Act that you all have worked on in Harrisburg. Leader McClinton, is there anything specifically that you think that you would identify out of that where you saw some sort of compromise or level of consistency between both sides of the aisle that you think there could be some agreement on?
So this bill was just rolled out a couple of weeks ago in January, Madam Leader, and we do anticipate getting support, of course, from the administration, from Governor Wolf's legislative team, but even across the aisle. The irony is that some of these measures were in bills that also created barriers for people to vote. So, there was pre-canvassing in one of the bills from the majority caucus, but it also included, a very limited number of drop boxes per county, no matter how populous the county. And of course, the county is populous as ours, and you go right next door to Mako and to Delco, you cannot limit the number of drop boxes just per county because the population is so dense where we live. It's just been a challenge thus far because every time there's a good idea in one of their bills, it's coupled with a few ideas that would limit people's access. But what we are hoping to accomplish this year, particularly before the next fall election, is to get a real compromise so that we don't have to wait weeks and days even to see, who won for United States Senate, who won for governor. We want to be able to have these things in place so that our county election officials get the support necessary and, of course, the law so they can organize these mail-in ballots and get everything situated.
Thank you, Leader McClinton, for that response. I will state that when we had to wait and wait and wait to know what the results are, you do feel like it is waning on the public's confidence in our democratic process. So thank you so very much for putting that on the record. Chair recognizes Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Leader. I appreciate it. And I just want to first take a moment to thank all of the witnesses on this panel. We appreciate your expert opinion as well as the work that you do on a consistent basis to fight for democracy. I know that there are a number of other panelists and witnesses, so I don't want to be too long-winded, but you guys have so much knowledge that I think it benefits us to be able to hear some of the things that you're working on and recommendations as it relates to how we should move forward as a municipality. We've heard a lot of issues around fraud and what issues are concerning people around fraud with elections, as well as this idea of people being forced to have a lot of their personal information being given to parties that's not necessarily safe. I'm wondering if any one of the panelists could speak to that issue and the work that you're doing in your particular area to assure that democracy is being protected and our personal information is being protected.
Well, I guess Councilmember Thomas, I could take that. Am I muted?
No, we can hear you.
No, there's an effort right now to via legislative subpoena to subpoena the personally identifying information of all 9 million Pennsylvania voters. And the ACLU of Pennsylvania represents intervener 8 voters, as well as the League of Women Voters, Make the Road Pennsylvania, and Common Cause Pennsylvania, asserting a constitutional right to privacy of that information. Specifically, it's the last 4 digits of the Social Security number and the driver's license number that could subject Pennsylvania voters to identity theft or all kinds of mischief if people have that information coupled with, name, address, and other information. So that case is pending, but we're doing everything in our power to protect the right to privacy of Pennsylvania voters in that case.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Thomas, may I simply add, just to echo one issue that Marian said, and what's sort of at the heart of this that's so so incredibly perverse. And that is that this request for all of this additional information, if you're interested in combating voter fraud, this personally identifiable information is the exact information you would need to commit voter fraud. If you were to apply for a mail-in ballot, you can't just request one. To verify identity, you have to include last four of your social security number or driver's license number. So the information, if it is given to a third party, as we understand it will be, and that third party has no experience in auditing and no experience with elections, much like the ridiculous sort of cyber ninja situation, if you follow that in Arizona, it creates a very real possibility, not just for a breach in people's personal security and identity theft, but also a real threat to election integrity.
Thank you for that insight. I appreciate it. My last question for the panel, and again, anyone can jump in and answer. When we think about the issue as far as language access, approximately how many Philadelphians do we feel like are not able to exercise their vote because of not having access to a ballot that particularly communicates the ballot information in the language that they're used to communicating in? And also from our state partners, do we know anything that's being done as it relates to dollars that might be coming from Harrisburg or even on a federal level to try to help offset the increase in cost of elections? Because we know that with things being the way they are now, post-coronavirus, elections do cost significantly much more. So that's my last question, Madam Leader. And again, I want to thank all the members of this panel for your expert opinion and taking the time to be here today. We definitely appreciate it. Thank you.
So this is Marian. I'll attempt to answer the number question. When in December of 2021, when the census released its designations, it includes 150,000 voting age Philadelphia citizens who would be covered under the existing Spanish and Chinese languages. However, the coalition had done some data research earlier that people that are not covered under 203 is also numbers also in the tens of thousands. Now, the earlier numbers were 47 to 88,000, but we really need to study the new 2020 census data, but it's definitely going to be in the tens of thousands. And note that not every language is covered under the Voting Rights Act, under Section 203. So it's a significant amount of the population. So I'll end there, but I refer the council members to the panel that's following this, who are others who have expertise in language access.
I'll attempt to answer the second part of Councilmember Thomas's question. The state definitely needs to do more to support every single county's significantly rising costs to hold elections. I don't need to tell people here that, we are currently not clear on whether or not there will be the primary on May 17th, at least for state legislative offices. So when you start to talk about, moving an election and the costs associated with that, and of course, if we are able to pre-canvass and get that into the law so that the county election officials can get all of the mail-in ballots organized, sorted, ready to open. When polls close, they have to hire staff to do that. And, that's not a group of people that are currently on their staff complement. So I know that those costs will soar. So that is something that I'm prepared to join in with all of the advocates and, of course, our elected city leaders as I go back up the turnpike to Harrisburg. We're in budget hearings right now to say that, not just our city, of course, but absolutely every county election official will say from the County Commissioners Association that more funding is needed from the state level to make sure that these rising costs are able to be paid for, because there is no slush fund in the city commissioner's office to be able to say, oh, okay, well, now we have to do this much more work so we can hire 100 people today. It doesn't work that way. So I definitely want to continue to advocate for more investment in elections.
Al, I see your camera's on. Al Schmidt, did you want to add anything to that discussion?
No, I would only add, as Leader McClinton said, while there might be differences among Republicans and Democrats in Harrisburg, there really isn't much difference between Republicans and Democrat Democratic election administrators across the Commonwealth. They all want more time to process mail-in ballots and all the rest. Whether it's a big city like Philadelphia or a small rural county, they all want the same thing, and that is to count their voters' votes and to do so expeditiously so that there isn't an opportunity to exploit that window of time between when the polls close and when we know the final results, as we've seen in 2020.
Thank you so very much. I'm monitoring the chat, colleagues. Are there any questions or comments from any other members of the committee? I can't see the hand raised signal, but I can see when you put it in the chat box. There being none, let me thank each and every one of you for your testimony today. Commissioner Omar Sabir is having technical difficulties, so whenever the commissioner is able to join us, we will include him on whatever panel we are on during this hearing. With that being said, Rachel, will you please call the next panel to testify on the resolution?
Yes, the next panel in this order is Tammy Patrick, Karen Yarbrough, Kahina Guenfoud, and Andy Toy.
Thank you, Tammy. Are you connected and ready to proceed? Can you hear us?
I am, Madam Chair.
Thank you so very much. Just state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Tammy Patrick. I'm a senior advisor to the elections team at Democracy Fund. Chair Parker, Vice Chair Green, and members of the Committee on Law and Government, thank you for the invitation to speak with you today on language access. For Philadelphia voters who are not proficient in English, it's truly an honor to be here. My name is Tammy Patrick, and I'm a former local election official from Maricopa County, Arizona, where I formalized and oversaw the Language Assistance Program for over a decade as their federal compliance officer. I served as a commissioner on the Presidential Commission on Election Administration, or the PCEA, and I believe partially based on that program, which we created to serve the 2 million registered voters we had at the time. We were tasked by President Obama via executive order to make recommendations on many facets of election administration, including the provision of effective assistance to voters with limited English proficiency. Today, I'd like to share a couple of points around language assistance. First, language assistance is not new. Second, expansive interpretation beyond the Voting Rights Act is established and growing. Third, the importance of community involvement. And then lastly, and by no means least, the growing need in these uncertain times. I believe these comments will support the other testimony that you will hear here today. So first, language assistance is not new. Voting materials and assistance in other languages other than English have been common practice well before the passage of the Voting Rights Act. At Democracy Fund's 2021 Language Access for Voters Summit, Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon shared that since 1896, Minnesota voters have had access to assistance and materials for voting in languages other than English. When the process first started, the languages were Norwegian, Swedish, French, German, and Italian. Those languages have changed. Now it's Spanish, Hmong, Somali, etc. But the principles are the same, providing citizens with the information that they need. Ensuring our community has what they need to effectively engage in the franchise, as well as be informed voters, is truly the sign of a healthy democracy. Expansive interpretation beyond the Voting Rights Act is established and growing. I mentioned Secretary Simon's comments at the Language Access Summit in December, and he shared that in recent years, they have more than doubled the languages they provide from 5 to 12. Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis, provides information in 10 languages, including Amharic, Oromo, and Russian. There are states and jurisdictions building upon what the requirements are under the Voting Rights Act, both in which languages are covered, as well as what the thresholds are for coverage for quite some time. California has been offering additional languages outside of the 4 categories listed in the Voting Rights Act for decades. Indeed, Los Angeles provides materials in 18 languages. Some cities, like New York City, have citywide programs that include election services in their programs. Leveraging those resources and the data collected and utilized by other departments is critical. As a way to refine service provisions, it can inform where bilingual support is necessary at the polls, what languages are most requested, and also what viable translation services are already under city contract for those ever complicated procurements. In 2021, Colorado passed new legislation to lower the threshold trigger for providing language assistance. We know that the census determinations can be problematic due to systemic undercounting, as well as the challenges present from the gathering of language data via the American Community Survey. So the need will most definitely be greater than what the data show. Importance of community involvement. Election professionals not only rely on each other's support and expertise, they thrive on it. It's wonderful to see Clerk Yarbrough here today. And I know that your commissioners and election staff have consulted other administrators, visited their offices, and benefited from those exchanges. So I truly encourage continued support of those efforts. Philadelphia is fortunate to have organizations like those testifying here today to partner with on this journey, because it takes more than one department, one organization, one committee, individual for a successful program. Collaborative partnerships increase the ability to correctly identify the needs, assess the scale of necessary resources to allocate, and then evaluate the quality of the translations and assist in the dissemination of information and the solicitation of workers. Lastly, the growing need in these uncertain times. Accurate, official, and trusted information is more critical now than ever. We know that when information deserts exist, as they do often within limited English proficient communities, mis- and disinformation finds fertile ground to grow. When talking to reporters about covering elections, I often advise that they need to know what is right so you can tell what is wrong. And it holds true here for voters as well. Making certain that all voters are getting information that is correct and legitimate should lessen the traction of anti-democratic narratives and confusing messages. Thank you again for inclusion in this hearing, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you so very much, Tammy, for your testimony. We hope you can stay on once we've heard from all of our witnesses. I'm sure my colleagues will have questions, so thank you for your testimony. Is Clerk Karen Yarbrough? Karen, are you connected today? You with us?
I am.
Thank you so very much. Just feel free to state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members of committee, I'm thrilled to add my voice to the voices you've already heard here today. My name is Karen Yarbrough, and I am the county clerk and the election authority for Cook County. Our area election in the suburban Cook, we have 1.6 million registered voters. And then when you include the city of Chicago, we have over 3 million registered voters. My office serves as one of the most diverse populations in the country, with almost 35% of households speaking a language at home other than English. And I'm here today to talk to you about how we invested in language expansion for election ballots and materials and how it's paying off for us. In 2019, I was approached by a couple of our county board commissioners and asked if it was feasible to voluntarily add new languages for printing ballots and election materials in certain areas where language groups were growing, but not quite enough to trigger a federal mandate to offer their language. After consulting with my team, and we did an evaluation of our election software, we realized not only could we do it, we could leverage our voter-friendly election laws, allowing vote by mail and early voting to bring 8 new languages to all voters in suburban Cook County. And that's what we did. In the March 2020 primary election, with COVID and everything else going on, we piloted 2 new languages, Korean and Tagalog. That's a Filipino language. With no problems that were reported, we added 6 more languages in the November election, bringing our total language offerings to 12. Now, though we have limited utilization data available, it's clear that people are using this program with some languages tripling in usage over one cycle. And I can tell you that on election day, when I went to some of these areas, it was thrilling to see some of the new Americans, if you will, who for the first time in their life, they were able to see their language on their ballot. Now, certainly there was a lot of work to getting to done. The VOTE program allowed us to hire language consultants and to work with Google's Translate election program to develop custom machine learning election dictionaries. And they guarantee accurate translation of highly technical terms. For instance, you don't want Democratic Party to become Democratic Fiesta on your ballot. In all, it took us about 15 months to implement and about $650,000 in appropriations for software for reprogramming, the Google Translate subscription costs and the personnel costs. Now, I'm not aware how much it may cost you in Philadelphia, but I will say that we are willing to share any and all of our data dictionary to help other jurisdictions defray these costs. I finally want to say that it's been a wonderful and rewarding experience, and it demonstrates how government can actually meet people where they are and deliver real change. But to close, some words from language advocates. I'm quoting Sik Song. He's the president of the Korean American Voice, and he said, and I quote, "I am so excited. This is a historical day for our community. The language barrier has been the biggest hurdle to stop Korean Americans with limited English skills from casting their votes. The Korean ballot will break the barrier and give the community a voice that has been silenced for a long time." Ami Gandhi is a senior counsel at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and he said, "My positive experiences advocating for language access to the polls has helped me reimagine what civic participation can look like in the city of Chicago and Cook County." My Deputy Chief of Elections, Ed Michalowski, is on the call today to answer any questions you might have. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to add my voice. And I'm hopeful that you'll be successful. Anything that Cook County can do to advance this initiative, we're here to help.
Thank you so very much, Clerk Yarbrough, for your testimony. And again, I'm sure there are going to be some comments and questions after we hear from each of the members on this panel. I want to call the next witness we have, and please correct your name because I'm going to chop it up. Is it Kahina? Kahina, are you present? Kahina Guenfoud? Okay. What about Andy Toy? Andy Toy, are you connected with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Andy. Please just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chairperson Parker, Vice Chair Green, and members of City Council's Committee on Law and Government. My name is Andy Toy, and I'm here on behalf of both Citizens for Language Access and United Voices for Philadelphia. I'm here to speak regarding resolution number 210657 in support of expanding language access and materials in our election process. I'm sorry that Kahina is not here as well, because she can give some firsthand accounting of what's going on in places like South Philadelphia, but maybe I know she wrote a piece that can be shared as well. And special thanks to Councilperson Thomas for introducing the resolution and making language access a personal priority. Thank you again. And thanks to most of those on the committee who have already expressed support for this effort. And listening today, I also have to give thanks to everybody here and those across the country who are fighting for our democracy right now. We all have to fight for our democracy, and that includes our city commissioners, who we sometimes disagree with, or we're pushing them, but they are doing the right thing. Commissioner Deely, Commissioner Sabir, Commissioner Bluestein, and ex-Commissioner Schmidt, who we have give a lot of thanks to for the 2020 election, of course. My testimony is the Voting Rights Act of 1965, even while under attack by some, has helped to protect the fundamental rights of many non-native English speakers across the country. As specifically Act 203, Part 203, Section 203. In Philadelphia, the Voting Rights Act has supported Spanish language speakers, and this spring will add Chinese language speakers because the population crossed the set threshold in the latest census. Both will now be required to receive critical election materials in their native languages. Our Citizens for Language Access Philadelphia Coalition of over 66, now close to 71, organizations have been making the case for years to add additional languages to go beyond these statutory requirements. We can reach many more marginalized potential voters, as we are witnessing in municipalities across the country, including Cook County and many others mentioned here. We know that more informed citizens are better engaged citizens who will be more likely to vote and also more likely to be actively involved in their communities. And our core belief is that to achieve equity, marginalized communities need to have their voices heard to be truly part of the democratic process and to have access to resources that often get bypassed in these communities. According to the last U.S. Census numbers, Philadelphia's foreign-born population is currently around 11% and still growing in numbers and percentage. If not for Philadelphia being a welcoming city to immigrants, thank you, Mayor Kenney, for a strong Office of Immigrant Affairs, our population and voting power would have decreased over the past decade. And this does not include the close to 150,000 people moving here from Puerto Rico, many with Spanish as their native language. Estimates of non-native English speakers who are eligible to vote, and this was done by All Voting is Local as a look at the census data research, and this is citizens 18 years or older, are up to about 87, close to 88,000 people. And even at, let's say, half of that, if we can get another quarter of them to vote, that's 10,000 people. That could be the difference in an election. We want and we need these citizens to exercise this amazing right, but we must do more to help. A couple of years ago, while I was at SEAMAAC in South Philadelphia supporting civic engagement efforts, we were able to send out a few hundred letters with nonpartisan information and explanations in language about the ballot to Chinese and Vietnamese citizen voters. When we were able to look back at those registered voters, we found that those who we reached out to in language came out in significantly higher numbers than many other voters. Unsurprisingly, our colleagues, and we could hear this from Cook County, I'm sure, around the country and at the Democracy Fund, I found this to be true. Everywhere election materials have been provided in language. In Philadelphia, there is no time to waste. All of our citizens, including historically marginalized ones, need to vote if our voices and needs as a city are to match our population. And in neighborhoods with large immigrant and underheard and underserved populations, this is hugely important regardless of who they vote for. In 2019, when the city purchased expensive new voting machines, the public was told that part of the reason for the choice was the ease of handling many more languages using touchscreen technology, which made us optimistic. 3 years later, we're still waiting that promise to fulfill the capability of these new machines. What the Commissioner's Office has explained to us, and as we work together, is that there are various costs and technical issues that must be overcome beyond the programming of the machines, and we understand that. And we are ready to help with that. What we have learned in our outreach to other municipalities and jurisdictions is that there are very efficient approaches and degrees to creating more inclusive systems that go beyond the machines themselves. And we know that in Cook County and many others across the country, including Los Angeles and other cities similar to Philadelphia that have successfully implemented programs that could serve as a model that we can replicate in part or wholly. We believe Philadelphia, as well as other nearby jurisdictions, can do this, but it takes leadership, it takes political will, and a commitment of resources to take the first steps. In Philadelphia, the birthplace of liberty and democracy in America, we can and must do better. We cannot let perfect be the enemy of the good, because if we do that, we'll never start down this road of greater inclusivity and equity. What we're asking for today is a commitment of resources to begin addressing the various parts of the process that will enable the commissioners to move ahead, to add language that can reach the next, let's say, 5 largest non-native speaking citizen populations. Because we are still learning from the implementation of Chinese, an exact amount per language is still uncertain. But we do know that Cook County has told us they've been able to implement new languages at around $100,000 per language with their targeted approach. Our initial request to enable the commissioners to move forward in good faith would be at least an additional $500,000 for up to 5 languages, if we can get to 5. Even if we fall short of 5, we will have learned a lot and built the infrastructure that will make it easier to extend the effort each year going forward. We're asking today because the budget cycle is here and the commitment must be now if we are to reach our goal to have this in place by this fall. Again, I thank you for your support, and we look forward to continuing to support the commissioners, our current commissioners of Dealey, Sabir, and Bluestein, and the city in this important effort to build a more inclusive democracy that we know will result in a broader, more equitable, and larger voice for all of Philadelphia. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Andy, for your testimony. If you could just stay around for us until we conclude this panel, I'm sure my colleagues will have some comments or questions. I now see our Commissioner, Omar Sabir. He has joined us. Commissioner Sabir, are you connected and ready to proceed?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. City Commissioner Omar Sabir. I serve as the Vice Chair of the County Board of Elections for Philadelphia County. Good afternoon, members of City Council and guests gathered. Here today, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the committee for inviting me to speak on this most important occasion. This month, we commemorate the tremendous contributions of Black people, not only in America, but across the world. And while we refer to February as Black History Month, our people continue to make history every single day. This nation owes us a debt that can never be repaid. So I choose to acknowledge the contributions of Black people all year long. Today, I stand before you as an elected official charged with helping to assure that our city, one of the largest in the country, conducts safe, fair, and secure elections. My presence today is even more significant because less than 60 years ago, I and many of those of you serving an elected office were not guaranteed the unimpeded right to vote. That is not a reason to celebrate Black history. I'm not sure what is. On January 6, 2020, I am sworn in as City Commissioner of Philadelphia. The Philadelphia City Commissioners consist of a 3-member bipartisan board of elected officials that oversee elections in Philadelphia County. I have the honor of serving as Vice Chairman with Chairwoman Commissioner Dealey and Commissioner Seth Bluestein. Our charge is to ensure that eligible voters across the city of Philadelphia have the opportunity to exercise their right to vote, a critical and fundamental pillar of our democratic system. In 2019, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania took a major step forwarding and helping to assure eligible voters can exercise their rights by passing Act 77, bipartisan legislation that dramatically expanded mail-in voting ahead of the 2020 election. The bill passed with almost unanimous Republican support, but since former President Trump and a loss in 2020, the bill has come under fire for many of those who voted in favor of its passage. As elected officials, it boggles my mind that those who want to make it more difficult for eligible Americans to vote. In the 2021 general election, I and my fellow commissioners were tasked with carrying out an election that was the first of its kind in Philadelphia. Has over 1 million registered voters. To show you the success of Act 77 2021 in the face of an ongoing pandemic, more than 230,000 voters cast their ballots, and about 1/3 were cast in by mail. Despite these unprecedented circumstances, we were able to fulfill our duty to guarantee every legal ballot was counted and the voices of our community were heard. Despite unfounded accusations and lies to the contrary, This is one of the most secure elections ever held. It was reviewed legally, audited, and certified without fraud or falsity. As a requirement by state law, a recount was triggered in the Commonwealth Court race. As part of that recount, our machines were recalibrated and swapped to recount the votes. The results did not change, which confirmed the safe and secure nature of our procedures. We succeeded in complying with the election code, something we would never doubt it would be the case. As City Commissioner, it is my job to administer our elections ethically, effectively, in accordance with federal and state voter registration and election laws. Without question, our data of elections are administered and conducted fairly in compliance with the law. I am an official sworn to entrust with guarding and the sanctity and legitimacy of the vote. That is their responsibility and an honor I take with utmost seriousness. But as an African American, whose people have a history of being disenfranchised simply because of our race, my commitment to ensuring that every eligible voter has the opportunity to exercise their vote, it is also a personal commitment. Be assured, in our representative democracy, our vote is our voice, and that voice must be heard. In the words of the late Congressman, the civil rights icon, John Lewis, the vote is precious, it is almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in our democracy. We must practice voter accountability and fight against voter apathy. Our time is now. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Commissioner Omar Sabir, for your testimony. And if you could just stay with us just in case any of our colleagues have any comments or questions. One of our witnesses I see is temporarily joined us, Kahina Guenfoud. Correct me if I mispronounce your name, but Kahina, are you with us? Are you connected?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry to join you a little bit late. Sorry
Sure,
for that.
No problem. Kahina, just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Okay. My name is Kahina Guenfoud. I'm going to write it. Okay. Thank you.
Proceed. You can proceed with your testimony, Kahina.
Yes. So, my name is Kahina. I work at SEAMAAC. SEAMAAC is a nonprofit organization located in South Philadelphia. Founded in 1984, work with immigrants with different services. My role at SEAMAAC is I'm the Adult Literacy and Digital Access Coordinator. I'm immigrant as well, and working with immigrants. Under my programs, I have the citizenship program, so I fill the applications and prepare immigrants to get their citizenship from multilingual communities. So myself, I can speak, and I'm multilingual, like 4 languages, including Berber, French, Arabic, and English. So according to my experience and the feedbacks that I receive from my clients, even if they get their citizenship, they prepare for the citizenship, but they still can't understand English. They can't make decisions in English. They can't vote, even if they are American citizens, because they said that we can't contribute to the decision of this country. We can't make decisions because we can't understand everything in the American political system or in the voting system because of the language, and it's different from their native countries. So that's why many of our immigrants, our clients, are like wishing to have other languages in the voting system. Because they understand English, a little bit English, they learn by heart the answers for the interview, but they can't think in English, they can't feel in English. So they need someone to explain in their native language so they can contribute to the decision. And they say that voting is very important because you are contributing you are contributing in the future of this nation. So that's why they ask for, if they wish, they have like other languages.
Kahina, thank you so very much for your testimony. I now want to ask my colleagues, are there any questions or comments from members of the committee for this panel? And remember, Chair recognizes Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if it's members of the committee who had questions. I do apologize. I know that I'm technically a guest of the committee, so I appreciate, Madam Chair, I appreciate the opportunity to engage in dialogue, and I appreciate all the expert witnesses and testimony. I do want to say, for the record, again, deep appreciation to Commissioner Sabir and the work that the Commissioner's office has done, as well as former Commissioner Schmidt. There were other testimony that was submitted today that's been placed on the record by other commissioners, and we appreciate them as well too. One of the issues that's been raised significantly is this issue related to language access. We heard some of the numbers, we listened to some of the expert testimony, and I'm just wondering, from the perspective of the experts that are on the call right now, what else do you feel like has not been covered as it relates to what we need to know on the legislative side as it relates to language access and the importance of us moving on this initiative right now? And I'll just open that up to any one of the panelists, because again, a lot of information has been communicated. I'm pretty sure you've been able to also hear some information from one another. We know that this is a really important issue, and we're going to try to do our best as it relates to the legislative side to ensure that we get this right. We know that it's going to cost money. I heard Mr. Tory communicate that specific initiative and specific task on our end in his testimony. But based on everything that we've heard today, I'm wondering what holes still need to be filled and what is it that we need to know? And that question is open for any of the members of this particular panel.
Yes. Well, like I know we but I guess one of the things that maybe could possibly be an assistance to us as well is the universities. You know, they all have different language as access as well. So maybe a partnership with the universities, maybe the embassies out of the area, that they may can assist with some of the language barriers, which wouldn't even cost resources. That's basically political will. So maybe, like I said, assisting helping us out with the embassies and the universities to maybe possibly assist with some of the language barriers.
Just a quick note along those lines. In the past, and we have helped, different organizations have helped, at least to make sure that we're not saying party when we mean fair and when we mean party. What was that? The Democratic Party is not a party. It's an organization. So yeah, we have people that can help with that too. So happy to provide some resource there. And I would just say, I think what's done in other places is a growing kind of thing. We start smaller. We're not going to get to 100% right off the bat, but if we can build from a database of people who speak, let's say, Russian, and in a couple years, you pretty much have most of those people. But the first year, you might not get most of them. But if you never start, you'll never get anywhere.
If real briefly, if someone from the Cook County side, just out of curiosity,
hello,
can you? Yeah, hey, real quick, if you could state your name for the record and just talk to us a little bit about the costs, because we hear the reoccurring issue of cost. Can you talk to us a little bit about cost on your end and how much do you spend in your county per constituent? Give us an idea of your demographic and help us understand a little bit about the fiscal side of how you implement this on your for your particular constituents.
Sure, thank you. My name is Edmund Michalowski. I work for Clerk Yarbrough as the deputy clerk managing the elections department. And in the first implementation stage, we spent $650,000. And one of the key issues that you have to realize when you begin a program like this is the communication within the respective technologies that you're going to employ. Everything from your voter equipment to the poll books, they have to be on par with what your objectives are. So for us, for the 3 million voters within Chicago and suburban Cook County, every time you go to the polls at any of the 4,000 election sites on election day, or the 100 early voting sites in the aggregate, every language is on every ballot, both spoken so people can hear it if they can't read it, and it's translated on the touchscreen. So really, for us, making certain that all of the technologies are within reach of what they can do and staying on top of it. You know, when we thought about this, and I'll digress for very briefly. You know, Aristotle defined inertia as motions in a void. When I look at democracy, I look at Philadelphia as a definition of what inertia is for democracy. So whatever we can do for you, I mean, we're going to be there, whether it's our spreadsheets and our documentation, or you know, whatever it is, we're there because you guys really led the charge on democracy, and whatever we can do to support you, we're here for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I can make a better closing statement than the one that was just communicated right there. So thank you to everybody on this panel. Thank you, Madam Chair, and to members of this committee. I appreciate the leverage and asking a few questions to this particular panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Thomas, again, for your leadership. I will ask now, are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee for this panel? Okay, there being none, Rachel, will you please call the next panel to testify?
Yes, Allison Perlman and Mark Meredith.
Allison Perlman, are you connected and ready to proceed? Can you hear us?
I can hear and see you. Can you see me?
No, can't see you now. Just keep talking. Okay, now I can see you. Thanks so much for being with us today. Just please state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thanks so much. So good afternoon, members of council. Thank you, Councilmember Parker. And thank you to Councilmember Thomas for inviting me to participate here today. I'm going to my name is Allie Perlman. I'm the Executive Director of Philadelphia 3.0, and I'm here to comment on resolution number 210657, calling for the exploration of ballot randomization. So I don't want to waste folks' time today delving into the details. Everyone here knows how the current system works, whereby ballot position is assigned by the drawing of lots from a coffee can. And I think everyone recognizes that there are inevitable shortcomings as a function of operating under such an anachronistic system. And I'm here today to share that there are some very simple and legally permissible ways that the city of Philadelphia can randomize its ballot, which would significantly reduce ballot position effects and make our elections fairer. In short, it would help resolve the problem that at present, candidates can gain or lose thousands of votes as a function of a coffee can, which doesn't seem terribly fair to me. So today in my testimony, I want to share 3 reasons why we should shift to a simple randomized alternative. The first is that ballot randomization increases the level of democracy in elections, particularly in large field and low salience elections. Doesn't burden voters. And the third is that ballot randomization can be easily achieved in a way that doesn't burden the city commissioners. So on the first point, randomizing the ballot to make elections more democratic. So many of us on this Teams today work to try to improve access to the ballot, and that work is typically focused on removing the barriers that exist for eligible voters to cast a vote. This work enfranchises voters, and it's obviously critically important. However, democracy works in the inverse direction too. That is, the mechanics of our election system ought to provide all candidates for office with the same level of access to all voters once those voters have reached the voting booth. It was not so long ago in Philadelphia that the arrangement, like the orientation of candidate names on the ballot, was used to advantage particular candidates at the expense of others. While that practice is no longer at issue, the fundamental problem remains. Some candidates have better access to voters as a function of where they appear on the ballot than others do. Ballot randomization clearly matters more in some elections as opposed to others. Elections which are high salience and low candidate count, like the mayor, DA, and controller, are very unlikely to be influenced by the ordering of the candidates' names. Conversely, ballot position is likely to play a material role in the outcome of elections in races where there are many candidates, like for city council at large, or, and even more so, and this is less the purview of this panel, but I wanted to raise it here, races for judge, particularly common pleas. Jonathan Tannen, who is a researcher who lives in West Philadelphia, did an analysis in 2016 for eConsult where he found that common pleas candidates who draw a ballot position in the top leftmost portion of the ballot triple their vote count as a result of their advantageous ballot position. In short, election results analysis demonstrates that ballot position advantages a small number of lucky candidates while disadvantaging a larger pool of unlucky candidates in races with bigger fields. Point 2, we can randomize ballots in a way that does not make it harder to vote. Voting is made easier by having each candidate assigned a ballot number on a fixed ballot. These two factors, the ballot number and the fixed ballot, allow the voter to review a sample ballot in advance of voting and allow that voter to easily identify her preferred candidates by ballot number once she's in the poll. There are clear strengths to this current system, and however it is that we choose to randomize the ballot must be weighed against those strengths. Any reforms to this system which make it harder for someone to vote should not be seriously considered. In order to randomize the ballot, we must determine how to preserve the advantages of a fixed ballot with ballot numbers while minimizing the disadvantages of luck-based ballot position assignment. And we can do that by randomizing the ballot across, for example, wards or council districts. In this scenario, a voter would see the same ballot as every other voter in his or her ward or council district, and that ballot would be fixed with fixed ballot numbers. Those voters could review their ballot in advance and know which ballot numbers correspond with their preferred candidates. So from the voter's perspective, the experience of voting would be nearly identical to what they're used to now. Candidates would have to slightly modify their practices by producing ward or district specific communications like mail pieces and palm cards. But this would be altogether a pretty low cost shift, and it would be principally administrative. But these candidates, as a result of having to bear this low cost, would benefit, and the benefit would be significant. In another analysis, Jonathan Tannen found that randomizing ballots across wards eliminates over 75% of the ballot position effect. That's huge. And point 3. In short, we can randomize across smaller units like wards or districts. This would help voters by retaining the benefits of our current fixed ballot system and help candidates by drastically reducing the cost of the ballot position effect. So point 3, finally, we can do this, randomize ballots in a way that doesn't make it harder for the commissioners. So when we talk about randomizing the ballot, the question ultimately becomes one of election administration. Can the commissioners actually do this? Is it legal? Is it practical? Is it within their budget? Current election law simply requires the drawing of lots to assign a ballot position. But this law does not require that the lot correspond in any particular way to the ballot position once, in any way that is predetermined. So, and I'm just going to share sort of 2 examples of ways that this ballot randomization might work. The first is that we randomize across council districts. So each council district would have its own random number generator, which would produce the ballot ordering for, let's say, at-large candidates in that district. And council members would draw a lot, which would correspond to their place in each of those 10 council district specific ballots. Another way to do it, if we wanted to randomize by ward, would be to say that we would produce a random ordering of the ballot position. And that random ordering would start, for example, in the first ward. And for every ward after that, going into ward 2, 3, 4, etc., every ballot position would just move one number down. There are plenty of ways to do this, and I'm happy to answer a lot of questions about this. It really is very simple, and I would just, for folks who are like feeling a little bit wary about the technical capabilities we would need to do this, I would just recommend Googling random number generator so you can see sort of how this works. This randomization process raises some questions about practicalities, but fortunately, most of the recent changes to our election system work in the direction that helps us to randomize ballots. Our voting machines have the capability to randomize, and mail ballots and sample ballots are already personalized to the division level. Finally, there may be an additional financial cost to this process, but it is likely to be minimal, particularly after the first cycle, and we get used to this. In short, the commissioners are within the law to randomize the ballot and have the capacity and the budget to handle this shift. The coffee can is idiosyncratic and it's quirky, but it is not good for democracy. It's like the sorting hat. It just happens to sort candidates into two houses, one house which gives you votes and one house which takes votes away. There are very simple and straightforward ways to fix this problem and allow all candidates equal access to voters. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Allie Pearlman, for joining us. If you will just stay connected with us and allow us to get through our final witness on this panel, we'll then open it up for questions from my colleagues. Mark Meredith, are you connected and ready to proceed?
I am here.
Thank you, Mark. Feel free to state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Meredith. As a constituent, I want to begin by thanking the Philadelphia City Council for holding hearings on the important issues of offering election material in additional languages, ballot randomization, and holding safer and more secure elections. I also really appreciate the opportunity to testify on these topics, as they are all related to the research that I conduct as part of my job as an associate professor of political science at the University of Pennsylvania. Finally, I want to thank the students in my class administering elections that I am currently teaching for letting me pause the class for a few minutes so I can share these thoughts with you. The written testimony that I submitted establishes the following 5 points related to the issues at hand. First, holding a safe and secure election requires that when an eligible Philadelphian casts a ballot, that ballot is counted. Second, Pennsylvania's current rules about what disqualifies a mail ballot from being counted threaten the ability to hold safe and secure elections. Third, investing resources in ballot curing, satellite mail ballot offices, and informational campaigns will reduce the number of disqualified mail ballots. Fourth, key election materials should be available in more languages than the 3 mandated by the Voting Rights Act and supplemented with video content when possible. And finally, ward-based rotations of ballot ordering will help ensure that no candidate wins or loses office entirely based on their ballot position. In the interest of time, I will focus my oral testimony on points of action that I hope the City Council considers when discussing these issues. While the City Council doesn't have the power to change mail balloting rules, it can invest resources to reduce the disenfranchising consequences of them. First, funds should be provided to identify and correct mail ballots when clerical errors that would cause them. Funds should be provided to identify and correct mail ballots with clerical errors that would cause them to be rejected. When a clerical error is identified before Election Day, a voter can remedy the situation by correcting it or by canceling that mail ballot and voting again, either by mail or in person. But a voter can only do this if they are made aware of the problem. Thus, I recommend more resources be allocated to identify problematic mail ballots and inform voters about them in a timely way. Money can also be invested in things that reduce the incidence of clerical errors in the first place. When someone votes at an in-person mail balloting site, election workers can highlight potential issues and answer questions that a voter might have about the process. Consistent with this, my analysis shows that voters who cast an in-person mail ballot at one of the satellite election offices in 2020 were less likely to cast a naked ballot than voters who received their ballot in the mail. Direct mail also can be a helpful tool for informing voters. Direct mail can also be a helpful tool for informing voters about the process of mail balloting. Along with some colleagues at Penn and the mayor's office, I evaluated the benefits of sending follow-up instructional postcards to registrants who requested the mail ballot in 2020. Our results showed that people sent a postcard were less likely to have their mail ballot canceled, as well as being more likely to return their mail ballot quickly. Thus, I recommend that the city commissioners be provided the resources that they need to operate satellite elections offices and informational campaigns targeted at people who have requested mail ballots. I'm particularly concerned about the potential for Pennsylvania's mail balloting rules to disenfranchise Philadelphians with limited English ability. My research suggests that neighborhoods with high proportions of non-English speakers are more likely to cast mail ballots that do not ultimately count. While the Voting Rights Act mandates that communication be in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Mandarin, I recommend that Philadelphia identify key materials like mail ballot instructions that could be provided in some additional languages that are spoken by a substantial number of our citizens. And while my research shows that direct mail can be a good way to communicate with potential voters, I suspect that having high-quality video content in many languages about both the mail and in-person voting processes might even be more impactful. Finally, I want to offer my support for a ward-based rotation of ballot ordering in primary and nonpartisan elections so that candidates do not have the same position on all ballots citywide. I have authored multiple research papers demonstrating that ballot order influences how people vote. Much of the data that I've used to conduct these studies comes from Ohio, which provides one illustration of how ballot rotation can be done. Precincts within a county are ordered. In the first precinct in the county, candidates in each race are listed on the ballot in alphabetical order based on their last name. In the second precinct, the first candidate in alphabetical order is rotated to the last ballot position, with all other candidates moved up 1 position. Studies estimate the effect of ballot positioning on vote outcomes by comparing the same candidate's vote share when they are listed in different ballot positions. They generally show that the same candidate gets the most votes when they are listed first on the ballot and fewest when they are listed in one of the middle positions. This is particularly true when voters can't rely on party cues to determine who they want to support, such as in a primary election. For example, one study that I authored found that in about 1 in every 20 California school board or city council elections, which are nonpartisan, the first listed candidate won an election they wouldn't have won had they been listed in a different ballot position. If Philadelphia were to implement ballot rotation, I conclude it makes sense for a rotation to look something like Ohio's, except that the rotation would be done at the ward level instead of the ward division level. I see that the most important feature of a ballot ordering policy is that it ensures that no candidate wins or loses office entirely based on their ballot position, which is not the case in the current system. While ward-based rotation will not make it so that candidates appear in each ballot position with the exact same frequency, it should assure that no candidate's chance of winning will be significantly changed by their ballot position. Moreover, ward-based rotation has 2 potential advantages over ward division-based rotation. First, it will be logistically simpler for election administrators to implement. Second, it will be easier for candidates to inform supporters about where they will be located on the ballot when they will be in the same ballot position in every division in a ward. So in conclusion, I want to thank again the City Council for their invitation to testify on these important issues, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you so very much, Ali and Mark, for your testimony. Let me ask my colleagues, are there any comments or questions from members of the committee or the chief sponsor of the resolution, Councilmember Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to thank this panel for their testimony. I think it was very informative, and it puts us in a position where we really have to brainstorm what we do as it relates to address this. I'm sorry, somebody has to
excuse me. I think they caught it, Councilmember Thomas.
So again, I just want to thank this panel. I think when you think about the issue, and just one quick comment, and then I'll pass it back to you, Madam Chair, and other members of the committee. Just when you think about the issue and the impact that these elections have, it matters significantly. So I'm wondering, based on the work that you've done and some of the rooms that you've been in, the dialogues that you've been a part of, what's the downside of ballot randomization? I mean, we heard a lot of the positives. We heard a number of different ways that it could be done. I heard the example about the Ohio election where we've seen it take place. I'm wondering what the counter argument is. And then after that, Madam Chair, I'll pass it back to you. And I just want to say thank you to everybody again for your patience today and for taking the time to do a deep dive into issues that we know we really need to explore and continue the dialogue as it relates to the work that we need to do as legislators to ensure that we have fair and proper elections here in the city of Philadelphia. Thank you.
I mean, I'll start. The downside is pretty modest, and I think that we both covered it here today. It's just that the candidates who typically would have to, for example, send out a single mail piece to all voters if they're running, for example, for an at-large seat, would in this scenario have to send out ward or council district specific mail pieces to account for the fact that they're in a different ballot position, depending on ward or district. It's really an administrative cost more than it is a financial cost, and it's something that people running campaigns would get used to quite quickly. It's a very modest shift. From the voter's perspective, really, it's exactly the same. A voter won't notice anything different. And I'm sure there will be, again, like a fairly modest learning curve within the commissioner's office, but we have the technology to do it. And we already are personalizing so many of the materials that voters get. Like the mail ballots that we receive are personalized down to the division level anyway. So this would just require that there be some additional level of nuance to the materials.
Mark, you want to add anything?
No, I think Allison summed it up well. I think in some places the implementation might be harder, but because we already do so many ward division offices here, I think the challenge is you have to proof every type of ballot that you come up with and make sure it's right. But we already have to do that in Philadelphia because we have so many very localized elections that it's not like we're using the same ballot for the whole city in the first place. And I agree with Allie that there's some potential learning curve on this, but I think it could be learned very quickly.
Thank you both for your testimony. Let me just ask one last time for my colleagues. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee for this panel? I don't see anything in the chat. Hearing no further questions, we want to thank you both for being here. We will now take a brief break to ensure that members of the public are connected to testify. We're going to take a quick break to ensure that members of the public are connected to testify. Thank you all so very much for your patience.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We have one public participant that joined Teams, so I don't think that we're going to need the break today.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Are the other two on the line?
They are going to be called in one by one.
Okay, understood.
Thank you so very much. Rachel, will you please call the first public commenter we have to speak on the resolution?
Al-Sharif Nasser.
Good afternoon. Al-Sharif, are you connected and ready to proceed?
Good afternoon. Yes, ma'am. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. Just state your name for the record and feel free to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Al-Sharif Nassif. I'm the Pennsylvania campaign manager for All Voting is Local. We're a collaborative campaign of the Leadership Conference on Rights, America's largest civil rights coalition of over 200 national organizations. And we work on hyper-local advocacy year-round to prevent barriers to voting before they happen. We work to protect our democracy and to uphold voting rights for every American. On behalf of Citizens for Language Access, which is a team of over 70 leading local immigrant rights, voting rights, and good government groups, I'd like to thank Councilman Thomas for his leadership and all the co-sponsors of Resolution 210657 for hosting this important conversation, especially as it pertains to language access and voting. I did want to direct the attention of the council members to two documents that I've submitted for the record on behalf of our coalition. The first is a letter from the 70-plus organizations echoing our call for language access funding and implementation support. And the second is an op-ed we submitted to the Philadelphia Inquirer. I just want to reemphasize some of the points been made today, if time permits. In the fact that America's greatest strength is in its diversity, and that includes the languages that we speak. And we really look forward to working with the City of Philly, the City Commissioners, the PA Department of State to ensure that language is not a barrier to exercising our fundamental freedom to vote, which is a cornerstone of our cherished democratic process, and really work to meet the needs of Philly's diverse and vibrant communities who speak other languages. I just want to emphasize the point that this is not something new that Philadelphia is doing. I mean, if we go back to the founding of the 13 original colonies, we got Dutch speakers, French speakers, German speakers, and even just a few blocks away from City Hall when the Continental Congress met, someone made a proposal to make English the official language of the United States. And that was quickly shot down by the rest of Congress as an undemocratic threat to individual liberty. And so from the very origin, of our country, Americans hailed from all different parts of the world, spoke many languages. And of course, the Native American stewards, the noble tribesmen of the land spoke dozens of different languages. And, I think we fast forward to 2019 and we spend millions of dollars in these new voting machines, and they can accommodate up to 12 languages, maybe even more. And so I just want to really iterate the call that we need the funding and support of the city of Philadelphia to make good on the investment that Philadelphia made in these voting machines and fund official election materials in at least 6 additional languages beyond the bare minimum requirements of federal law. And I'll just end with this point, which is that former Georgia legislator and the voting rights activist Stacey Abrams credits much of her success in changing Georgia's political landscape to grassroots outreach to fast-growing AAPI and immigrant communities that are often overlooked. And so here in Philadelphia, which is the cradle of American democracy, could play a pivotal role in both state and federal elections. We hope our leaders can work together and invest in voting equity and ensure that voters in marginalized communities are fully engaged, have every opportunity to cast a ballot, and enjoy a smooth and welcoming voting experience. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be heard, and we look forward to working with you.
Al Sharif, I just wanted to note for the record and for the benefit of the public that the 2 documents that Al Sharif just referenced, they have been circulated to all members of the committee, and they have been given to our stenographer so that they can be put on the record. In addition to that, Commissioners Bluestein and Dealey also submitted written testimony, and that has been put on the record as well. So Al Sharif, thank you so very much for your testimony today. Let me ask Rachel and or our tech team, is our next public commenter queued?
It should be Jean or Jean. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Guillaume.
Hello.
Hi. Please state your name for the record, and feel free to proceed with your testimony because we don't want to chop up your name.
My name is Jean Guillaume. And I'm a community organizer for the Haitian community. Thank you for inviting me. This is my first time testifying, although I didn't prepare anything because I got the invite very late. But I've been trying to organize the Haitian community for the last 6 years. And this year, we wanted to take 10,000 more Haitians to the poor, but the most of the problem that we've been encountered in the Haitian community is the language situation. Most of the Haitians don't know how to speak English, especially the older folks, and unfortunately, some of them also don't know how to read. So having Haitians that speak Creole and at the poor as a poor worker, and also translation to the ballot and Creole, that will really help Haitian participating at the voting process. So I've been listening to you guys, and I'm very glad you guys take that to heart and to making sure all communities are heard. So thank you for your effort. Hopefully you guys can make this a reality, because it will be a tremendous opportunity for a lot of Haitians to participate and to exercise their civil liberty. Thank you.
Jean, thank you so very much for your testimony here today. We appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Rachel, will you please call the next public commenter we have to speak on the resolution?
Yes, the next and last public commenter is Josephus Stuffies. Again, I may be mispronouncing it a little bit.
Joseph, are you connected and ready to proceed? Hello? Let's give our tech team a second here.
Please leave your message for
Cynthia Parker.
For members of the viewing public, we are now attempting to connect with our public commenters, and we have to dial them into our session. So we want to say a special thank you to each of you for your patience while our technical team attempts to make a connection. We want to ensure that those who are scheduled to express their perspective have the opportunity to participate.
Madam Chair, it seems that we cannot connect with the public participant.
Okay, what we will...
You have reached Joe Gaffis. Please leave a message. Thank you.
What we will do for the final person who was scheduled to give a public comment today on the resolution is that we will allow that person to submit their comments in writing, and we will ensure that it becomes an official part of the public record and included for this resolution. Let me ask right now for the record, is there anyone else here to testify on the resolution whose name has not yet been called? Hearing none, before we actually conclude the hearing, the chief sponsor, Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. Councilmember Thomas, are there any closing remarks or comments that you wanted to make before we conclude the hearing?
So thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to again thank you for your leadership and my colleagues as well, members of this committee, for bearing with us and being a partner of this important conversation. And of course, thank all the experts and panelists and those who have lived experiences with these issues who continue to advocate and fight. And just know that we're listening and we're brainstorming from a legislative perspective. What can we do and how can we make it easier for everybody to have and participate in fair elections, fair and accessible elections here in the city of Philadelphia. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so very much, Council Member Thomas. A lot of great information put on the record here today. There being no one else here to testify on this resolution, this concludes the business of the Committee on Law and Government for today. This public hearing is recessed to the call of the chair. I want to thank you all so very much for your participation and have a great afternoon. And to our tech team and all of our staff members, thank you for making this possible. Have a great day.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great hearing.
Thank you.